Welcome to Chai Pe Kharcha, where we have conversations on personal finance among four NRI professionals working at tech firms. Think of these like water cooler chats you have at the office. Only this time, you will have Ishan, Madhvesh, Rohit, and Siddharth as colleagues you will be listening into. Before we get started, a quick disclaimer: we are not financial experts. The content provided in this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. Always consult with a qualified financial professional if you need financial advice.
Hello and welcome everyone to another freshly brewed episode of Chai Pe Kharcha. We have a very special guest with us today, welcoming Varun Vatheeswaran, who's a colleague and friend. Varun, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Excited to be here.
Awesome. We also have Siddharth today, who's one of our regulars, and myself, Rohit. So we'll be talking to Varun about how, as a NRI in Singapore, he looks at his investments and his own money management, personal finance. What are his core principles and beliefs? What are some best practices, things to do, not to do? And we'll have some fun along the way. All right, Varun, ready to get started? All right, awesome. So, for the benefit of our listeners, could you first tell us a little bit about just your journey over the last few years in terms of maybe how you started earning money, your career, how you eventually became an NRI, where have you been living for all these years? Let's get into that.
Sure. So I've been working now for a little more than 10 years and I've been working in Singapore. I'm based in Singapore right now for about 7.5 years. And yeah, so true sense NRI in that I've seen different phases of Singapore, which I think is something that is worth calling out. So there's the pre-COVID era. I think COVID is one of the more calling out points of generally living abroad. Pre-COVID, I'd moved in here in 2016. Literally moved with two suitcases, didn't have too much of responsibilities any in life. Good, enjoying the country, enjoying the culture, getting to meet a lot of new people. And then there was the COVID era, which was a mixed bag. Was comfortable within the country, but not being able to kind of go out of the country made it a little hard. You kind of reevaluate what are some of your priorities in life, what exactly are you searching for, what are things that you want. And then there's the post-COVID era, which is trying to get to the pre-COVID era, but I don't think it's kind of gotten there as yet. But the phase of life you're in also is changing. Your priorities are different. I got married a couple of years ago, so it's not the same as what it used to be, let's say in 2016 or 2015 and stuff, right? So yeah, that's been a bit about me from like a personal point of view. Thoroughly enjoyed staying here. The opportunities that you've gotten professionally has been the biggest reason why you moved to a foreign country away from your motherland. I'm enjoying living here. And let's see what the future holds.
All right, thanks for sharing that. So you mentioned you've been working for around 10 years, and obviously, people go through phases in life, priorities change, views change. So how do you think your views on managing money, personal finance, investments have evolved over your career, both while you started working, maybe when you became an NRI, probably started earning a decent chunk of money without too many responsibilities, and then getting married and then finally finding yourself at a different stage of life.
Yeah, I think that's a good question in that your relationship with money is something that is very personal. And I believe that's something that actually changes over time very consistently. What I thought of or what my knowledge of was of money was very different 5 years ago versus what it is now. And major part of it I'll come down to just on a personal side is almost everything that I've learned is from my father. Kind of uh, grilled it inside me from the day I started earning, like start saving. And the idea of what saving is or investing is for him was more of save first, invest first, and then worry about spending. His idea was not necessarily to be like, yeah, don't buy your sneakers, don't buy your random online shopping. You can do all of it. Figure this out first and generally be patient. And maybe the idea of patience is something that I've learned over years. Generally seeing your money compound in the last 10 years from what it was when you started off, not something that I believed in. Always kind of kept telling him that, यार नहीं बचाना इतना पैसा क्या क्यों करना है and all of that. But you understand that more. So I guess that's the crux of my what I would say relationship with money is generally being a little patient I would love to say that I've kind of mastered it. Far from it. I still am pretty impatient at it on things where I'm like, don't need to put your money here, or probably don't need to save X amount. Maybe can be a little lesser, a little more, and so on. But yeah, grounding factor has been a lot of what my father has kind of put it down on me on what how you should be saving, how you should be approaching. So that's been like generally the guiding principle, at least for me.
I think that's a really interesting point because I feel like for almost everyone, a lot of your money beliefs and practices are very heavily influenced by your parents, and in some cases, like a bigger part of your family as well. In my case, I think very similar to yours, the idea of saving and the idea of tracking your expenses. These are two things that my father drilled into me as well. There were some investing mistakes that he also made, which maybe taught me things like how to do things a little bit different rather than follow exactly what he did. But some of the core beliefs around like making sure that you have enough for a rainy day, taking care of your basics first, not like running after every whim and fancy that catches your eye.
Hmm.
Those things, those foundational pillars have really shaped how I have been able to manage and get to a certain stage where, as you said, like money has compounded over time, and now I can really see the value of.
For sure. Sid, what about you?
Same here. I think most of the, it, and I stereotype a bit, but Indian middle class seems to be that zone where parents teach you to save and then think of save. It's आप जब वॉरेन बफे से सुनते हो, you've been listening to that since your childhood and you never paid attention to the value of that advice. Perhaps similar to both of your parents.
I think that also sort of touches on the fact that as our generation starts becoming parents, it happened a little more in an unplanned way, right? Like generally, you waste money on something, and then your dad will scold you, and he'll be like, "Yeah, you should save money." But I feel like there is opportunity for our generation to be more intentional about it. Like, how do we actually make it a specific topic of conversation in the household? How do we make sure that our next generation is learning about some of these things? I don't think that was really planned in the previous generation. It just happened. Like you observe something or you get scolded and then you learn from it. Rather than having like a proper sit down conversation that "Hey, these are things that you should do now that you started learning." Like, at least that was the case in my situation. Uh,
No, I think it's very similar that again, not to generalize, but generally it's a maybe a father thing in itself of being good at mathematics, being the one who's kind of drilling down on you, think about finances, think about expenses. I, I don't want to kind of pat my own back, but I think one thing I did was, yeah, I'll listen. I admit that I don't know as much. Let me try learning. And that was the one part I'm like, ठीक है, आप बताओ, सुनूंगा मैं. And then I'll see what can happen of it. And that's, I think, what most people are today, and are not necessarily like, I know it all, but they're like, yeah, give me some good advice, and to people whom they can trust, if they can get that from, works, why not?
I'll just add to this and not to stretch this topic too long. I think why, so you talked about as we are becoming parents, we'll also have to do similar things or should. It's more difficult for us because at a macro level, India in our parents' generation was in a stage where it was trying to develop, people were trying to get to a state of living. We have fortunately been privileged to not face as many hardships, and money has been relatively easier to us compared to when we have to embed the same principles into our children. It's different. So the way my parents taught me, कि भाई, everything was frugality. Their perspective was कि we वो जैसे बताया कि save first and then think about anything else. I think I have I agree with the overall concept, पर मैं पूरी तरह वो follow नहीं करते.
Maybe our elder generation more don't even talk about money. Let's not talk. It's a little,
Sometimes,
it's a
yeah.
bit of a taboo topic. I think with our generation, maybe it's getting a little better of openly talking about money. Right? I'm not saying good or bad, but at least there's a fundamental difference in you're not being completely shy. You see so many people being a little more transparent about what's the remuneration you can expect for jobs. That creates a sense of you understanding, hey, what's my market value, what am I worth, and so on and so forth, right? So that just opens up just because we are having conversations. So I think that is also like a good difference between what previous generation was.
Even spending on
For
things
sure.
like the basic example, pillow, सोने वाला. My parents would think about it very frugally कि 10 वाला वो लेते हैं कि वो पिलो ही है, क्या फर्क पड़ना है. जब मैं सोच रहा हूँ पिलो खरीदने के लिए तो आई एम थिंकिंग आई एम स्पेंडिंग 8-9 hours in a day on it. I should buy the best quality pillow. So that change in mindset also comes with a spending pattern.
Yeah, that's a good
Uh,
example. No, I think definitely there has been a change in terms of the availability of money, and basically in the hierarchy of needs, I feel like our generation has obviously shifted up a notch where we are not necessarily always optimizing for survival or always waiting for that rainy day to come, which, maybe our parents' history taught us that there is a rainy day waiting somewhere around the corner. In our case, it's more like, yeah, it's probably a very low probability event, but we just want to be prepared for it. But in the meantime, let's earn money, let's invest money, let's also enjoy the journey by having those, let's say, the slightly finer things in life, such as a good quality pillow that you can have a very nice and comfortable sleep on. So, what are some of the core beliefs around money that you hold to be true, based on which you decide how you invest, how you save, and how you spend? And Sid, feel free to jump in.
Like I said, a lot of it is learning from seeing what people around you are doing. You're generally also gravitating towards what successful people are doing. So you also want to see what are some of the best practices they have. One of the things that at least I'm taking away, a lot of it is of course passed down from family and my brother and my father and generally around is the idea of saving first and then doing everything else. First, transfer money to the other accounts that you have. If you have any, put off your money in your mutual funds and then because you first and then a Hail Mary situation, if something is needed, you're still not necessarily dipping into your savings, you're still dipping into whatever is left for spending. And that just from a maybe Sid, you were also talking about it. I think that's been a bit of a difference in like our generation is liking to spend also. So the aspect of once you finish saving, don't necessarily be like, yeah, we have a little more to save. It's actually more like, no, now it's good time to actually spend. So buy that extra sneaker, go for that fancy dinner that you want, go for those gold class ticket movies, whatever, instead of going for regular, whatever. I'm just giving some examples. I think fundamental premise that I've learned first is save first and then do the expense. And that's a simple habit, but it's a habit that really pays rich dividends over the longer period of time. So that's something I've started. What about you guys?
Still, before we come to either of us, I'll just extend on Rohit's question. How do you think about more broader concepts like insurance, like investment into specific, or not specific instrument, but investments in general? Let's split it into FDs versus anything. And then things like having a house and a car,
Mhm.
which is a separate form of financial. Yeah. So, tell us about that.
So my general portfolio, if I may say so, right? Maybe about 80% of the money, if not more, of what I save is directly into equity and hybrid funds. I am a little risk averse. I'm not necessarily too much into trading, especially daily trading or stock trading as such. So my money generally goes into equity and hybrid funds. I've been trying a bit and fiddling around with some of the local robo investors in Singapore. A bit of a hit and miss, but I guess that's part of your portfolio. You kind of expect that. Some of it is also a bit of a cultural background and something that you've been brought around. You touched upon property. That's definitely an area where I kind of had this from a childhood thing that ghar kharidna, like at some point in life. The fact that I was able to move to Singapore, be able to save a little bit more, kind of pulled up that plan, invest in a house. So yeah, that's also part of the portfolio, but primarily on a monthly basis, it's generally going into equity and hybrid funds.
Do you believe owning a house is a necessity? or more of a, like, I mean, think of it like this. Like, what is a well-rounded life for a person in terms of how you might define success in the conventional term, right? And I'm not talking about you have great relations and great health. Like, yes, obviously, all those things are probably much more basic. But in the more conventional sense of success, is owning a house like a thing that should be aspired for? Or
Yeah, I mean, again, this is not to get too philosophical too early already, but I think water and food is a need. Everything else a want, right? You can decide whether house is something that you really want. Some of people are going to be like, no, property is just not my thing. I don't believe in the idea of the investment in getting a property, upkeep, maintenance, all of that thing. I'll rather put my money, take it out when I'm 60 or maybe retire at 50, whatever, and just do it. I don't need a property. I can rent a house and I'm okay with it. So that I think is a bit more of to each their own. To me personally, I do believe that, yeah, I like the idea of owning a house. It's something that's truly your own. It is an investment that over a period of time will appreciate. It's not like a car, it's not a depreciating asset. And there is the whole emotional aspect of it as well, of your family generally also wanting to see you own a house. Yeah, that aspect is also there, right? So all of it mixed together, it's not never, in essence, financial decisions never are, even though you would love for them to be, there's a good amount of emotion involved in it as well. It's not completely bereft of emotions. So yeah, that's my.
I think that makes sense. And I think that is basically what forms some of our core beliefs, right? Like, it's the fact that finances are not a mathematical thing. You can't solve your money on a spreadsheet. There is a lot of emotion involved. There's a lot of, I think, generational uh, things that come down from your parents or grandparents, such as owning a house is a thing, right? Like you said, you had that in your mind since you were a kid. Those are the things that I feel form some of our core beliefs. In my case, I've had to intellectualize it out of my brain after reading maybe hundreds of blogs and YouTube videos and this and that. Maybe I don't need to rush after purchasing a property. I want to do it, not obviously for mathematical reasons, because I don't think the maths works out, especially in India. Maybe
Mhm.
in like the US or some other economy might work out, but I don't think it works out in India. I still want to own it at a stage where owning that property will be a reasonable percentage of my overall net worth. Right. So let's say something like 20%, 25% of my net worth is a property, but I still have the rest of my net worth, which is free and liquid, and I'm able to like, live my life with that money rather than having it locked in something which I'm only going to consume and not really generate any extra value of. So
Fair enough.
for me, a core part of me believes very strongly in owning my own property, but then I fight that instinct very hard to try to stay on course because I feel like there are things that I want to get done before I want to get to that. Obviously, an empowering factor to that is the fact that I have been lucky that my parents they have their own apartment, so I understand the sensitivities of a household where there is no owned property at all in the family. And I know people in my circle who have felt that burning desire to get something of their own, not for themselves necessarily, but for their family. They have gone ahead and, like, as soon as they got enough money, that was literally the first thing they did, like, drain out everything in order to get a permanent roof over their family's head. Right. And I think that's completely legit, right? Because as we said, it's an emotional thing. It's not necessarily a mathematical, intellectual.
True.
Couple of other
How we've discussed real estate in previous episodes, but let me put another perspective to it. One can think of a house as a hedge. As Rohit said, it's not necessarily the best of investment in terms of returns, but it is a hedge because it is something of intrinsic value. Intrinsic value is something, even if the world stops believing that that thing has value, you can still utilize.
Hmm.
For example, घर पे अगर आप कोई स्टॉक ले रहे हो, कल को स्टॉक प्राइस कैन टैंक हो सकता है, पर घर पे आप स्टिल देयर इज सम यूटिलिटी इवन व्हेन पीपल्स परसेप्शन ऑफ इट गोज अवे. So it's a good hedge like gold, or one could think about Bitcoin also in that. We've had a lot of Bitcoin discussions, which I don't know if you've followed that episode.
Now, I will also come out clean and accept my knowledge across coin in general on the newer form of investing, if I may say so. I call this with a larger bucket because there are so many things I don't know within them also. It's pretty limited. And so I do a lot to see if I can learn a lot more about it. But maybe it's just down to a bit of risk appetite and like, yeah, I don't know enough about it, so इसमें पैसा नहीं डाल. So maybe it's that also. Historically, you have seen, ठीक है, all said and done, I get the market factors that you guys study now and say that real estate में पैसा नहीं है or it's not the greatest return. Like you said, there's the emotional aspect of it also, but you've also seen it over the years. This is something that I've not physically seen. So again, don't take my advice on this. This is not even advice, but the idea is this is kind of how I'm at least thinking about things.
Which I think points to another sort of a principle or a core belief. It like don't get into stuff you don't understand, right? And I think I made the mistake of violating that principle, and I paid the price for it. And if you have been able to maintain that discipline, is to not get sucked into the hype and the paranoia around like crypto and Web3 and everything else that happened in the last few years. I think kudos to you that you were able to sort of stick to your guns and said that, okay, I will either learn about it and then get into it, or if I don't understand it and I don't feel the need or inclination or don't find the time to get into it, I'm not going to put my money just for the heck of it because everyone else is doing it. And I think that's something worth appreciating because like I found that to be a personal failure in my.
You're being nice here, Rohit. I'm just going to feign my laziness and not wanting to read up about it or learn more about it as, yeah, it's a masterstroke decision. But no, I think this is one of those things where you don't want to be kind of left behind. You don't want to keep a tab. You want to read up and then make an educated, informed decision to invest or not to invest. So yeah, you should be reading up. You should be learning about this. But yeah, I'm still a little behind on it. Have some catching up to do.
Actually, actually, that's a good segue into the next question on, because this episode was supposed to be Singapore specific nuances for an NRI. Within Singapore and from Singapore, what are the investment instruments that you use? So you mentioned equity. Did you mean mutual funds, equity wale, yeah, direct stocks? And if you do it in Singapore or in India or in both, and how much percentage if in both?
Yes. So, okay, let's talk about that. I think the larger theme is at some point, I don't know which point yet, I to get back to India. I don't intend to stay here for eternity. My point is that I want to put maximum amount of my money that I'm making with money is the thinking behind it, right? So I think 85 to 90% of my money is back in India. I send a lot of money back. I mean, I said equity and hybrid, they're back in mutual funds in India and hybrid funds across. I did experiment a bit with some of the robo-based investors here. नाम वाम सब ले सकते हैं ना? I hope that's not an issue. Yeah, ठीक है. हाँ. So I put some money in Stashaway right now. I'd actually put in start of COVID or just before. So it's been what 3-4 years right now. Got a mixed bag of results as such, but that's the only thing that I've been trying from an investment or savings point of view in Singapore, because that's not in INR, that's across USD, different currencies that's going in, but primarily based out of Singapore. So it's not necessarily in the Indian market. That's about it from a major investment point. Majority of it is back to India because the larger goal post, if I may say so, is back at home, and the aim is to get back there. So the idea is of the growing disparity between the currency rates and see how much more you can save.
What's your perspective on currency depreciation? Because this is something with almost every episode we touch upon it in one way or the other. What it means is the value of Singapore dollar to rupee is changing continuously, where Singapore dollar is becoming more and more expensive in terms of rupees. So I asked this question with the point of view that if you're sending the money in India, you're potentially losing on the increased value of Singapore dollar if we kept it in SC. What are your thoughts on it?
That's one way of look at my thought though is that let's say I'm sending a fixed amount of Singapore dollars back home, right? That value is still growing as a corpus in India just because of the currency rate that I mentioned. And like I said, this is my belief and I might be wrong, but this works for me. The idea still is that because I intend to go back, my primary modes of investment, savings, I want to be in my home country. That just makes a little more for me. So make use of the growing disparity between the currency rate, if I may say so. Send it back home and then see what you can make out of it. That's at least my thought process or thinking behind.
There's something interesting that I recently researched and concluded on. There are basically two pieces which come together to make a decision, and as all decisions go, there is a trade off, right? One thing that I learned talking to someone on this podcast is there are ways to invest in India's blue chip stocks through Singapore without transferring your money. So there are these ETFs and these mutual funds which are run by global fund managers, and that is available in Singapore. So you can invest in an India fund which will invest your money in, I think, the top 100, top 120 companies of India. And that gives you all the India exposure that you need. It allows you to keep your money in dollars. So the amount of time that you spend in Singapore, you capture the India equity growth, you capture the dollar to rupee exchange rate growth, and in Singapore, you don't pay capital gains tax. Right. So that just gives you a tremendous advantage in terms of achieving what you want to achieve, and then adding that extra kick of tax saving and fund management fees and all those things. So it really works out in your favor if you're so inclined. The other principle that I learned from one of our previous guests on this podcast is if you are a person who has dependent, you want to make it very easy for people that depend on you to have access to your money when you are not around. Which means for me, I was at that point very strongly considering taking up insurance policies in Singapore. But as soon as I heard about that, like, my beneficiaries or my dependents are my parents who live in India. My wife, she works, right? So she has her own income, she has her own job. I'm fully confident she can support herself purely from a mathematical financial standpoint. If I have to purchase an insurance, it must be in a place where my parents are able to access that money, right? So if I do it in Singapore, I'm essentially locking away my beneficiaries from being able to effectively tap into that benefit that I have paid for and designed for their use. Similarly, for my investments, the trade off to the previous approach where I said that you can invest in Singapore is, for whatever reason, if I'm not around, getting access to a Singapore account and then being able to claim the proceeds of those investments and saying that, hey, I want to liquidate. I have, Rohit's power of attorney or whatever it is called. And then getting a Singapore bank or a platform to execute all of those things is going to be a massive challenge. So I think that's where the trade off comes in. And I haven't really been able to figure out where to draw the line. But I have been approaching it very similar to you, Varun. In the last 5 years that I have been in Singapore, is to transfer a major chunk of my money to India and then
Hmm.
invest everything here. But I am greedy about the tax savings and the currency depreciation. But I'm also very hesitant to not lock away my money from people who am earning all this money and I want to have a better quality of life.
This is the end of part 1 of the episode. We will continue next week with part 2. Thank you for listening in and stay tuned.